Welcome back. In this lesson, we are going to be talking about Booleans and the Bool tool. So let's go ahead and get started using Blender 2.9.1, and let's just do general. And I'm going to turn on my Eevee render mode, and let's go ahead and save it as, we'll just call it Boolean. One of my favorite words. All right, so let's get started with the Boolean modifier. We'll just take our Suzanne here, and let's add the third option here, which is a Boolean. And Boolean is just an operation that lets you add, subtract, or intersect different geometries together. It is amazing once you understand it. I have a love-hate relationship with the Boolean operation because sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And that happens in a lot of 3D programs. But I want to show you some tips and tricks that I use to make it a little bit more better and get the desired results that you want. And I do have to say that since I'm using the newest Blender 2.9 and 2.91 over the past few months, I have to admit that they have dramatically increased the Boolean modifier, so it works a lot better than it used to, and I'm very happy with that. But the main things that you need to know with the Booleans is that one, your meshes need to be watertight. So this Suzanne is actually not watertight. The eyes are separate meshes. So, you can see there. So I'm going to show you what it looks like to have a non-manifold mesh and try to Boolean it. Another tip to keep in mind is that you want your scale ratios to be at 1 as much as you can. So say if I scale this up, notice that my scale ratio in the information panel here at the bottom, the scale ratio is 0.63. That's because I scaled it a little bit. So if you ever do that, there's no problem with scaling here. You just want to make sure if you scale inside of object mode, you do Control A, and that will apply, and you can just apply scale or rotation scale. But you just want to pick scale here, and notice, bloop, it fixed it. We kept our dimensions, and now it's set to 1. So that just helps sometimes. It doesn't always mess up your Booleans, but if you're having Boolean trouble, check here as one of the steps that could help solve your Boolean issues. But enough of me yammering on. Let's get to Boolean and some stuff. So I'm just going to create a new cube. So do Shift A and select a mesh cube. And it's really tiny right here, so let's crank it up to maybe like 50. There we go. Now we've got a cube. I'm just going to hit G and X, kind of slide it over here. And the old school way to Boolean is to use the modifier. I don't use the modifiers anymore manually. I just use the BoolTool, and that is a free add-on that comes inside of Blender. We're not going to talk about it right now, but we are at the end of this lesson. So for now, let's just go into the step-by-step of what the Boolean modifier is doing and what it can do. So we have the Boolean operation on our Suzanne here, and we can select different types. We can do intersect, union, and difference. And by default, it's going to be set to difference because that's what people use most of the time. Usually it's like union or difference. And you can think of these as adding objects together with union or subtracting objects from one another with difference. So now we need to tell the Boolean operator which object we want to subtract from our master object here, Suzanne. So if we take our little pick whip here, we can take our eyedropper and click on the cube, and bloop, notice now cube is inside of our Boolean operator, but it doesn't really look like anything happened. I do notice that around the edge of Suzanne, we have half of her now. You can kind of see that half of her is gone, but there's still this big cube in the way. And that's just the kind of default way that Blender does its Booleans, which I think is kind of annoying, but I'm sure there's a reason for it. So one thing you can do is just click the little eyeball, and that will turn it off. But you can't really change the the Boolean afterwards. I mean, you can, but it's a little trickier. So what I like to do is keep the cube on and select your cube layer. And then if you go to this little square here, this is your object data. And if you scroll down, there is one down here that says visibility. And if you twiddle that down and scroll all the way to the bottom, there's a drop down that says display as. And right now it's texture. That's why we can see it. So we want to change that to bounds. And looky there, now we've got a kind of like a see-through version of our cube, and we can select it, hit G and X, or just grab it and move it around. And these are some of the issues that I wanted to show you because Suzanne is not manifold. Notice it's it's Booleaning, it's subtracting the box from her face with no problem whenever we're in the middle of our face. But as soon as we get to the eyeballs where the issues are, where there's non-manifold geometry, or in another word, there's big holes in it, when we hit G and X and slide that over, notice we're going to start getting weird artifacts where, it's open or it's not subtracting the cube and it's like adding it together and it looks just not doing what we want. And the reason for that, and what I want you to understand, is it's not Blender being stupid, it's us being stupid, because we have to, as 3D print designers, understand that it can't make the Boolean operation if there's a big hole in this geometry. So one thing we could do is fix the Suzanne head and make it manifold and, make sure it's all one single mesh, and then we would have no problem Booleaning these. So that's just one thing I wanted to show and explain to people, because I know many of my students and myself, when I was first starting with Blender, Booleans can be just a headache. But once you really understand what is happening mathematically or what is going on under the hood, it can help you when doing your Booleans. So we'll just hit G and X and kind of move it over here. But essentially all you need to know, that was my long-winded version to let you know how to subtract objects together, and how to, just think about what is happening with your geometry when you're doing this. And so another cool thing you could do is inside that modifier, make sure you have your Suzanne selected. You could easily just flip it to union. So now these two objects are combining together into one object. So if I go into wireframe, notice, the monkey's head is not inside of this geometry, because slicing software does not like it. If we had half of Suzanne's head inside this internal cube, it would confuse it and not know what to do. But with the union, it will bond these together as best as it can. You can kind of see that it's broken this face right here to here, and from here to here, to kind of make this work. So I'm going to go back into solid view or rendered view just by hitting Z and up. And now we've got a cube here. And notice the cube is turned on, and you can kind of see the bounding box, these dark edges around it. So now I have Suzanne, but if I click on this, notice I've got this yellow outline, and that's actually the cube, or the bounding box that we turned on. So if we turned off the cube, notice we don't see that bounding box, but we still have these two objects together because they are in fact one. This cube is now part of Suzanne's mesh data. And so the Boolean is a very, very, very powerful tool that you have to understand as a 3D print designer when working in Blender, because the objects have to be manifold. So you have to know how to make your objects manifold, and this is how you do it. And the third way that we can use the Boolean tool is with the intersect. So notice if we do intersect, it's actually going to take the intersecting geometry. So the head part of Suzanne that's inside of this cube is intersecting. The cube and this half of her head are intersecting. So that's what Blender gives us. So I don't use that as much, but there are ways that you can use this if you feel like getting creative. But I don't use this too often, but that's what it does. And then we have the overlap threshold. So sometimes when your geometry is messing up, or if you export a design and your Booleans are not showing up, sometimes you can mess with the overlap threshold and just change that value to, like, instead of 0.000001, you could do like 0.0001 or 0.1 or 1, and just try different values, and sometimes that will help. I don't use it too often. The new Blender is really just working magically, so I'm very happy with that and don't really tend to use this too much. But if you're having Boolean troubles or Boolean headaches, again, check your scale ratios, make sure your objects are manifold, and try and mess with your overlap thresholds, and that should help. So that's my 2 cents. But what I really want to show you today is the BoolTool. That is the fun way to do Booleans inside of Blender. I believe I never use this modifier manually anymore, so let's go ahead and start doing that. So let's get rid of Suzanne. Goodbye, Suzanne. Thank you very much. And let's get rid of our cube. And so now what I want you to do is play with the BoolTool. So the BoolTool is a very fun add-on that lets you quickly add and subtract and intersect and slice objects together with ease, and it makes it so much fun. So let's go ahead and create a new shape. You can bring in any mesh shape you want. I'm just going to bring in a cube, keep it simple, and let's throw on a material here. There we go. And then let's bring in another object that we can Boolean to this cube. So I'm going to do Shift A and then just pick some other object. I'm going to do a UV sphere. And notice it's really tiny here, so I'm just increase the radius to 25. There we go. And let's hit G and X just to kind of bring it over to the side here. So now we've got the two objects, and the easiest way that I like to BoolTool objects together is just go to the Edit tab, and if you don't have it, go to Edit, Preferences, and under the add-ons here, you just type in Bool and make sure that's checked and save it right here. And there you go. And that should let you, it should appear right here. And notice we've got a few different options. We've got auto booleans and we've got brush booleans. And we still have our same options. Difference, which is subtraction, you can kind of see from the icon here. Union, which is adding. Intersecting, which is just taking the where the two objects collide. And then we have another one here called slice, and that will do exactly what it sounds like. It will slice the object. So let's go ahead and play with these. First we have the auto booleans, and auto booleans are destructive. So I don't really recommend using these unless you really know what you're trying to achieve and you know you don't ever want to make any changes to your geometry. Then it's okay to use these auto booleans. But what I like to use are the brush booleans. So watch what happens over here in our modifiers to our cube here. So if we want to subtract this sphere shape from our box here, what we want to do is select our cutter object first. So in my mind, I always say, I want to subtract this object from this object. And if you just hold Shift and click like that, you're essentially telling Blender, this is our first object and this is our second object. So again, I would say, I want to subtract this shape from, while holding Shift, this shape. And now all we have to do is use brush Boolean difference. Bloop. And there we go. We've got a perfect Boolean. We can select our little sphere here and hit G and X, or just G and just move it around and really just place the Boolean where we want it in real time and get an automatic update, which I think is just amazing. But a better way to do this, what I like to do, let's bring in another shape. So I'm going to do Shift A and just bring in another shape of your choice. I'm going to do a UV sphere. And so now we've got another shape here. And a quick way to do the same thing we just did is click on the object. I want to subtract this object from, while holding Shift, this object. And instead of hitting the button here, what I like to do is just hold Control and minus over on the far right side of your keyboard. So Control minus, looky there, and that has activated the brush Boolean difference. So get in the habit of using that keyboard shortcut, because then you can Boolean like a banshee and just be BoolTooling all over the place. So, you know, it's a very fun way to do Booleans. And look at that, I made a very crazy, I don't even know what that is, but it's very cool. And it was made in a very short amount of time. And it looks like I did all this advanced designing, but really we just hit a couple keys and added some shapes. So that is the BoolTool difference. And notice if we select our main or our master shape, we have two Booleans here, and Blender has done a lot of the work for us. We could even switch them. So hey, now I want it to be a union. There we go, that looks cool. I could also do intersect, and that gives us the intersection of all three objects. So it's a very, very powerful, very flexible design style. And the last tip I want to give you about the Boolean workflow is parenting objects together. So if you're doing Booleans on an advanced project, it's a good idea to parent them together, because if I move this master cube, look, oh no, the Booleans are changing. You know, maybe I had it exactly how I wanted it, but now if I want to move this, I'm like, oh no, my Booleans are all messed up. So a good way to fix that is just shift click on your cutter objects, hover them over the master cube or your master object, and then hold shift. And notice it says drop to set parent, bloop. And now if we grab that master object, they're all going to stay together like a little family because they're parented. And so that is how you do the brush Boolean difference. Let's create another object, maybe over here. I'm just going to shift right click to bring my 3D cursor, shift A, and let's add an icosphere. So let's just bring up the radius, maybe 25. There we go. So we've got a icosphere, and for here we can just do Shift D and just start duplicating, all these little things. We're going to make a quick little cloud. So I'm just doing Shift D, Shift D, Shift D, and just making a little mesh here. You can even scale some of them up. Remember to do Control A, set your scale, because when you scale things, it's going to change your ratio. So just Control A. And sometimes that doesn't matter, but sometimes it does. So if you're having issues with any of your Booleans, that could be the cause. So just reset the scale. And then now what we can do is take our icospheres, just select them here. And notice that this one is kind of a brighter yellow, and these are still highlighted, but not the same shade as far as the text color goes. So when I do a brush Boolean union, it's going to add the modifier to this one here, the one that's the active object essentially. So if I do union, or you can do Control plus over there on the far right side of your keyboard, and that will do the same thing. And that's what I want you to try and do. So just do Control plus, and that will do a brush Boolean union. Notice you've got them all here. We've got a ton of them all right there. So that would have taken quite a while to do by hand, but the BoolTool just does it for you. And now we can, shift click these and drag them into our object here. So now they're inside of our main icosphere. And now we can just drag it around, just G and just click and drag. So now I've made a quick cloud within a few seconds inside of Blender. You can even see how we have all these grids, are these little bounding boxes everywhere? This is giving you the flexibility to I kind of want this one to be a little higher, or this one's good, but I want this one here to be a little smaller, And notice I didn't apply the scale, but it still worked pretty well. So, sometimes it can affect, sometimes it doesn't really do anything, or it doesn't really, affect the Boolean. So just use your best judgment. But this is just a fun, amazing way to do Booleans in Blender. When I found out about this, I was freaking out because it's just so much, it just makes adding objects so much more fun. So that is how you do the brush Boolean union. And let's go ahead and save that. And say if you are happy with your object and you want these little grid boxes or these bounding boxes to go away, just turn off your icosphere layers. Just click and drag down, and then now you have just your main object, just kind of floating around there. Even if I scale that, they all stay together, which is great. And I'm just going to rename this cloud, and this can still be cube. And now let's shift click and add our 3D cursor over here, and let's add another object. So maybe like a cone, and I'm just gonna, it's actually really, really tiny. You can see our cone right here. If I hit period on the numpad, it's super duper tiny. So I'm just gonna hit S to scale it up by I, and then do Control A to reset the scale. And so now what we can do is do the intersection. So let's add another object. I'm gonna do Shift A and add any one of these. I'm gonna do a torus just for fun. And the torus is very tiny here, but again, we'll just take the torus and scale it up till it fits, and then do Control A to set the scale. And now what we can do is use the brush Boolean intersect. And the shortcut for that is Control numpad multiply, or the asterisk. So let's click on the object we want to intersect, and this one. So just shift click those both and do Control multiply or Control asterisk on the numpad, and bloom, there we go. We've got the intersection of those two objects. And we can still, take the torus here and move it up and down wherever we need it or want it to go, or take our cone and move that however we need. So I don't really use the intersect too often, but it may help you for whatever design project you're trying to achieve. And again, over in our modifiers panel, you can see that you can always change that if you wanted to. And the last one is the slice. And that's going to be kind of like the intersect, but it does a little bit of the work for you. So let's take another cube here. Let's do our shift right click and bring our 3D cursor over here maybe. And we'll do a new cube. There we go. And let's do another, maybe another UV sphere. So something like that. And let's just grab it and bring it over here. So if we slice some object, it's going to duplicate the geometry and kind of make a slice of where these two objects interact. So let's kind of show you what I mean by that. So let's take our first object, this sphere here, shift click on the cube, and let's slice it up. And notice here, Blender has duplicated our cube and put a intersect and a difference on each one. It kind of did multiple operations for us. So if we turn one of these off, you can see that's one of our pieces. And if we turn this one off, you can see that's our other piece. And so now we've got two little pieces or parts that can fit together very snugly. So that is a very powerful operation that you can use with 3D print design. But yeah, so that's the power of all the different modes of Booleans and how to use the Bool tool with the for 3D print design, and some tips and tricks to get some Booleans to work better for you. So again, after you've done any of your Booleans, you want to just select your master objects, and then you can go into your 3D print toolbox, check all, everything's good, and then you just would export where you want these files to go. So we can just do export, or maybe we want to export this one. This is our cloud. We'll hit export. Take this one, hit export, and just make the craziest shapes that you can think of with these. And then for this one, you would have to select both of these parts. So you would click both and export those, and that will export it as one, or you could export each one individually depending on what you're trying to do. So now I brought all the items into Prusa Slicer, and you can see they're all 3D printable. The slice box here is actually sliced, but you can't see it because it is so perfectly matching that you need to separate them. So if you right click inside a Prusa Slicer and say split and then do two objects, notice that it is now split into the objects that we need. So that is how you can use the Bool tool. Let's go ahead and slice these up. Looky there. So now we've got all the different parts. I would definitely change the orientation before printing some of these, but I'm not going to print all these because really they're just here for example, but just so you can see that they are all 3D printable and all manifold and are super cool, quick ways to make very, very interesting geometry in a record time. So let's go ahead and jump into the next lesson.